Israels store støtter og nære allierede er jo USA, og de har faktisk advaret.
Good morning, everybody. Can you take your seats, please? We will start in less than 1 minute. Please take your seats. Please take your seats. Okay, good morning, everybody. I hope you have had a great dinner yesterday and you have had some rest. We welcome you all to the second day of the second Global Dialogue. The program for today will be similar to yesterday. We will just first start by the reporting back from our facilitators, and then we will have a series of expert presentations followed by the World Cafe in the morning session, similar to the setup that was done yesterday. And then we will move to the breakout workshops directly after lunch. We had 4 breakout workshops yesterday. We will now hear back from the facilitators on the discussions that took place and issues highlighted under each session. I now invite Mr. Philip Turner, Head of Sustainable Development, UITP, who facilitated the track on deployment and shifting to collective and non-motorized modes of transport. Philip, you have the floor.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you very much. I just want to kind of give you my headline feedback because I think I took quite a lot out of this, but really, when looking at the opportunities and best practice solutions, I mean, it's actually very clear what needs to be done. And there are so many best practices out there which you fed back in the session that I think we just need to really enable it. But I think from what really I took from this was really the value, actually, of this second global dialogue. I'd love to do it again on a transport and nexus topic. I think it would be really interesting. So for me, I really took that positive message from really the opportunities out there. Looking at really the policies and measures, I mean, again, there are so many different aspects that you could do, but I think really the interesting thing from the discussion is about actually bringing people together and having that dialogue, be it at a policy level from national to local, but also with citizens and youth. You know, this actually doesn't have to cost anything, but it can make such a significant difference, really, that coordination role. And I think it's really also when you're talking about sustainable transport and collective non-motorised modes of transport, it's really critical to that behavioural change aspect to it and really bringing cities back to people. Looking at the capacity building side of it, I think there is really a strong desire for this. There's a need for it. Clearly, there isn't a one-size-fits-all solution to the issues that we have, but I think it's so critical to share those best practices out there. And I think, for me, what I took from it is that the role that non-state actors can do in facilitating that. They do a lot of capacity building, a lot of technical assistance, and I do feel like they're underutilized. But this is, again, why I see the value of this dialogue. It's about also bringing these people into that conversation because we can provide a huge amount. And I think, lastly, the acknowledgement of the link between the wider sustainability benefits of collective and non-motorised modes of transport. The links to the health and safety agenda are so significant, and I think really it is so critical that people better understand that link, because I think it really helps make the case for investments and policies in this area, and I think it's critical that politicians and the public better understand that. And I think there are so many opportunities outside of this. There's the first World Sustainable Transport Day on the 26th of November to raise awareness of that. There's so much opportunities that we can do that. But I think really for me, I really saw the value of yesterday. And I'd also like to take the opportunity to thank everyone in this room for their active participation, their openness. I learned a huge amount. So just a very big thank you for me, and have a great day.
Thank you very much, Philip. I now invite Dr. Anvita Arora, the Program Director, Transport and Infrastructure at CAPSARC, who facilitated the track on electrification of vehicles. Anvita, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Amir. Good morning, everybody. It is a pleasure to see all of you again. We had a wonderful, wonderful set of 4 sessions in the afternoon, but also the World Cafe. So I think we had the opportunity to have everyone express their ideas, talk about what's working for them or not. So we had Elizabeth Connelly, who was joining us, and we were supported by Bernd Hackman also through all the 4 sessions. So we discussed opportunities, best practices, policies, and a lot of pilot projects, which was very interesting. And the most interesting thing was that the countries came up with what worked and what didn't work. So that made it a fantastic learning opportunities for the other countries who are, everybody's at a different part of the trajectory as we are going towards electrification of vehicles. So it was a great exchange, and what it showed is that electrification is approached with a completely different context, in a different manner, and developing countries are also customizing their own approaches. For example, we saw very interesting pilot discussions around their countries which are piloting electrification of buses, some of school transport, some of the government fleet. So I think countries have figured out for themselves what is it that is working, what is a great starting point, and there was much to learn there. So while the electrification of vehicles is one of the elements of energy transition, I think the big learning for us was there is no one size fits all. And there is no one pathway that fits all. So let me quickly go over some of the key things that were discussed. I think the first thing that came across the board was electrification of vehicles requires a holistic framework, right? And you have to look at everything. You have to look at people, jobs, grid, terrain, weather, everything. So it requires a holistic policy framework at the national level and the city level, and it requires a long-term planning and cooperation, even internationally, because there is a technological aspect to it. The other thing that came through very strongly is that we have to ensure energy access before everything. So ensuring that there is energy access, ensuring that there is affordable energy available to everybody, is a prerequisite before we start talking about electrification of transport. And I would add even affordable mobility to everybody. The role of the grid is extremely important, and I think a lot of people highlighted that the first dialogue is connected to the second dialogue in that sense, right? So the role of the grid has to be fit for purpose. The grid needs to be green or as green as possible, and that plays a lot more in the life cycle analysis when we are looking at emissions. Otherwise, you don't want to start increasing electricity consumption if the grid is dirty. But also, many of the countries highlighted that electrification of vehicles, whether it's buses, cars, whatever, would require investment in enhancement of the grid. And that is also an additional cost that countries will have to think about before they go on this pathway. Another point that was raised was on waste management, because the fact that you need to have a proper waste management cycle of the e-waste that is generated, the second use of the battery, the recycling infrastructure, all those things are another part of the ecosystem that need to be in place. There is a need for international cooperation and enhanced support. Access to funds was the top of the line, but also technology cooperation and capacity buildings. And what was beautiful in the rooms was that there were countries who expressed a need for that cooperation, and there were other countries who willingly offered support, both in funding and technology transfer. So I think that allowed for some very interesting connections to be made, I hope, in the rooms. Capacity building, raising the awareness not only of the consumers, but also generally of the public. Training is extremely important. There were concerns about car mechanics. They would have to be retrained separately, or they have to look at for different jobs. So those conversations about technologies, infrastructure, investments there. And the socioeconomic benefits that come from EVs that include health and jobs, but there are disbenefits also in some countries, including health and jobs. So there were a lot of conversations that came from both sides. I think what was, so for example, with issues of energy security, there were countries which are Bhutan, Ethiopia, who kind of highlighted that their electricity is completely renewable, right? And they produce it in-house, like hydroelectric or others. And for them, actually, it worked for their energy security needs if they went electric. Whereas there were countries who are not producing the renewables.
Can you try to wrap up in 1 minute?
Yes,
please?
I'm done. So that was my last point. So that's it. I just want to say thank you very much. It was a wonderful conversation and a great opportunity to talk to everybody. And I think I learned more than all of you. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Amvita. I now invite Mr. Ghanem Hablil, the senior negotiator of the incoming COP28 presidency. Ghanem facilitated the track on energy and resource efficiency in the transport sector. Ghanem, you have the floor.
Thank you. So I first want to express my gratitude to the experts that joined us in the call yesterday. They did add to the richness of the discussion with their insights and their subject matter expertise. Johan Falk and Carla Barron, thank you for your participation, and also thank you to all the participants in this session who contributed with their interventions and with their country-specific experiences. Thank you for sharing. So I'm just going to highlight some of the things that stood out and weren't already mentioned by my colleagues. The first guiding question was on opportunities, best practices, and actionable solutions. I think that in the context of energy and resource efficiency, looking at the supply chain of critical minerals, having a clean supply chain of critical minerals presents opportunities, but also challenges, right? So cross-border standardization seemed to be one opportunity. This is not something that is done already. If there is a standard on fuel, a standard on emissions, a standard on manufacturing, this, instead of being exclusively domestic, there's an opportunity to have cross-border partnerships in having a much broader scope for these standards. Intelligent digital systems, this was something that was recurring. a recurring theme among rooms. So intelligent digital systems do require a lot of critical minerals, but then at the same time they contribute to the safety of transportation and also can enhance sustainability by doing more frequent quantifications on the performance of the vehicle and on adjusting the mode of operation of the vehicle through a feedback system. So on effective policies and measures implemented, there was an interesting example given on, I'm going to start with the challenge. So if the average lifetime of a vehicle is 12 years, by the end of 12 years, a lot of times that vehicle finds its way outside of developed countries to developing countries. Now that's a problem. So then having a way to recycle the useful materials in those vehicles is another opportunity. So one example that was shared was when you purchase a vehicle, I think this was in Norway, you pay the cost for recycling upfront, and you only get that cost back when you return the vehicle or when you're ready to let go of it, more than a decade after making the purchase. So this upfront payment incentivizes the practice, and it helps create this circular framework for resource consumption. So in terms of the financial, technological, and capacity building needs, there were concerns raised on jobs in the fuel, fuel stations, so the employees in gas stations. If there's a way to shift from a fossil fuel consuming mode of transport to another one, then those jobs would be affected. And this would also have broader socioeconomic impacts on the surrounding communities. However, there is also an opportunity for upskilling and creating new jobs in maintenance and operations in more complex forms of transportation. So there's both challenges and opportunities there. In the context of international cooperation, trade barriers were addressed, so then access to the right technologies and access to the materials needed to create these transportation systems, those pose a challenge. The disposal of vehicles, as mentioned already, also was another challenge. And one more thing I wanted to add, there was an interesting point brought up by our colleague from PNG on drawing analogs from other forums. So she mentioned the ICAO. So in that case, there's an agreement on setting a standard for what type of fuel would be used in aviation, and that would go down to manufacturers. So the ownership.
1 minute, please.
That's right. The ownership would be on the manufacturers. So there are lessons to be learned by other forums. Thank you for listening, and thank you for your participation.
Thank you very much, Ghanem. I now invite Dr. Amir Ahmed Amir, the Transport Chief Technologist, Research and Development Center at Aramco. And Amir facilitated the track on shifting to low or zero carbon fuels. Amir, you have the floor.
Great. Assalamu alaikum and good morning, everyone. Very interesting discussions we've had yesterday. I'll jump very quickly into the takeaways on behalf of the group. So the very first thing that was discussed was the need for a full cycle approach to ensure holistic accounting of all greenhouse gases, not only CO2, but also methane. And the agreement was, or the discussion led to basically that this needs to be adopted to select the optimal combination of solutions that will mitigate the climate change by various countries. Of course, this will ensure that the burden is not shifted from one sector to the other. The other thing that was pointed out is the need for peer-to-peer learning, technology transfer, co-financing, and R&D collaborations between various institutes in different countries to ensure that the climate challenge is mitigated globally. This, in essence, really paves the road for supporting emerging economies in their journey to achieve their goals. One of the suggestions was to have dedicated workshops around these topics. Another point that was brought up was the ensuring that the public is informed before policy enactment, which is quite critical for adopting new technologies. One suggestion was that if government pilot some of these projects, that will send a very strong signal to the public about the value and the merits of these technologies. Crop-based biofuels contribute to deforestation or damaging land conversions where the benefits may be eliminated. Biofuels like those made from biomass waste or native perennials have a great potential to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, especially if planned on land that is not currently used or not well suited for crops. This comes with some things along the policy that should reward greenhouse gas emissions over the entire life cycle to make sure that you're accounting for the indirect land use and promoting bio-based fuels that use both land and energy efficiently, and ultimately looking into opportunities to unlock the potential of organic feedstocks such as organic wastes. Synthetic fuels is the other point that was brought up, being complementary to biofuels. They can fill the supply-demand gap. They also can be blended with conventional fuels to gradually reduce the carbon intensity while providing time for scale-up to meet the growth in demand. Another point was brought up regarding the cost of low-carbon and zero-carbon fuels, which is currently high. Several opportunities were discussed along the lines of co-processing, co-feeding of intermediate energy carriers and biofeedstocks in existing, sometimes stranded assets. Also scale-up of production driven by demand growth that initially could start or will start from aviation. This will improve the learning curve and drive the cost down eventually. And then if such fuels or intermediate products like synthetic crudes or methanol are processed in countries with abundant renewable hybrid energy, which is basically both combined solar and wind, the cost will go down. And then ultimately R&D efforts that will drive the direct conversion of CO2 into fuels that will bring the capital intensity significantly down. These are some of the opportunities that were aimed at addressing the cost, the high cost of these kinds of fuels now. Another point was brought up related to resilience, reliability, and capacity of power generation to supply the electricity for the transport sector, which needs to be assessed prior to enacting policy to electrify transport. There is a domino effect on macro and microeconomics, including lost jobs and reskilling of workers. So these are some of the issues that were brought up that need to be carefully assessed as countries make their decision to transition from conventional fuels to low carbon and zero carbon fuels. My last point is that there is a need that was stressed by many around the four tables where we had the discussions around standards and certification procedures to quantify or qualify the low carbon and zero carbon fuels from a carbon intensity standpoint using a full life cycle approach. I'll stop right here. Thank you very much,
Ahmed,
and for all those that participated.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Just also myself and my co-chair would like to clarify that these are just high-level reporting back, and we have all the detailed recordings, and everything would be reflected in the report. So you might not heard whatever you mentioned in the reporting back, but rest assured that everything would be captured. So I would like to thank all of our speakers and facilitators for the sessions yesterday. Thank you very much for contributing to the mitigation work program, and we hope to see you again. But of course, you're continuing with us as facilitators in the World Cafe, and thank you again. Please join me with a round of applause to our speakers and facilitators. So can the speakers for these presentations, the presentations for today, please join us here on the stage? Thank you very much. Do we have John Mark? Yeah. So maybe. Yes, John is here. Can we change the yes these signs? Okay, Lula. Yeah. So I now hand over to Lula to moderate this session.
Now we're moving on to the next session, and we'll have a set of experts' presentation as yesterday to kind of set the scenes for today's discussions. Today's presentations will address the barriers, challenges, and financing issues related to the just energy transition in the transport, with 4 subtopics: financing issues, technology and capacity challenges, barriers and challenges around addressing sustainable development and socioeconomic impacts, and barriers and challenges around policies and measures. We've invited several experts to give brief overall presentation on each of the subtopic. And we will now start with the subtopic on financing issues. I would now like to invite our first speaker, Mr. Binyam Reha from the he's the Global Practice Manager in the Transport Global Unit of the World Bank Group for his presentation. He will join us virtually. Yeah, Can you hear us? Hello? While Binyam gets started, maybe we will start with our other speaker on the same issue of the financing. And if the Secretariat can confirm that they can put up Mrs. Céline Stan's presentation, maybe we can start with Céline's presentation while Binyam finishes connecting. Yeah. Thank you very much, Céline. So Mrs. Céline Tan is a professor at the University of Warwick, and she will give a presentation on the financing issues. Can the Secretariat please put her slides on the screen? Thank you very much. Céline, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning to the co-chairs, to Lola and Amar for inviting me here
Sorry,
today.
can you put the microphones a bit closer? And yeah, can people make sure that they're working as well?
Okay, sorry.
Thank you.
Yeah, so thank you to the co-chairs, to Lola and to Amar for inviting me here today to share my thoughts. Thanks to the organizers for the excellent organization and the hospitality that you've shown us throughout this meeting. So delegates, yesterday we had a very fruitful discussions, as you heard back, on the opportunities, the actionable solutions and the technologies for scaling up just energy transition in the transport sector. And today I'd just like to highlight really one significant barrier and challenge for operationalizing and implementing these measures, and that's finance. So finance is key to scaling up ambition and implementation of just energy transitions, and international cooperation on finance, as we heard just now from the report backs, is really crucial to implementing just energy transitions. And when you look at the cost of transitions, again, we heard that the cost of transitions isn't just about the cost of facilitating projects such as electrification of the transport sector or infrastructure or policy and regulatory reform. It also involves the cost of mitigating the impact of transition on impacted communities such as transport workers, traders, consumers, and also to look at dealing with the environmental dislocations and externalities that come with this transition. So the cost is wider than just projects and programs, and also involves the cost of enhancing adaptive capacities of communities and the economies, such as economic diversification plans, upskilling of skills of workers, etc. So there's a lot more higher cost than what is commonly shown. And this cost, the finance of just energy transitions in the transport sector must be just and it must be equitable. It must take into account the disproportionately high cost of finance for developing countries, particularly low-income developing countries, small island development states, and other climate-vulnerable countries. And there are two issues here in terms of the disproportionately high cost. One is the cost of financing, of borrowing for developing countries is particularly high, particularly in an era of high interest rates. And secondly, we have to take into account the existing debt service burdens of many, many countries, which is increasing. We are at the highest level since global records began in terms of debt service levels. So we need to take that into account. And financing should also take into account the disproportionately high cost of an unjust or disorderly energy transition in the transport sector, as in other sectors. So we're looking at potential for stranded assets, for displaced workers, the possibilities of economic stagnation if we have a disorderly transition from a fossil fuel based economy. And of course we have environmental externalities that we have to deal with. So what's important to remember here is that the modalities and the terms of financing themselves must support mitigation efforts in a just and equitable manner without undermining the country's sustainable development needs and pathways, and in accordance with their respective capabilities, all of which we know underpins efforts in the multilateral climate regime. And financing must, of course, be accompanied by technology transfer and capacity building, as we heard, in a life cycle manner. So what are the challenges in financing just transition in transport particularly? We know, firstly, the needs are very, very significant, and they greatly exceed the capacity of national budgets. There is also increasingly a reliance on debt instruments and private finance. I'll go into that in the next slide, to finance energy transition, but this creates legal, regulatory, financial risks, especially for developing countries. And one of the risks of this related risk is the fragmentation in financing transitions if we're looking at financing of discrete projects and programs as opposed to those that are integrated. They can be decoupled from national policy plans and frameworks, and that's really undermines the efforts to create a orderly transition. There's limited financing and social and economic safeguards to operationalize a just transition for affected communities and countries, and this cannot be financed from private sector finance, we'll see in a bit. And of course, we have also technology capacity building requirements that are significant, and they also need to happen to reduce long-term dependency on external sources of finance. So I just want to pick up on a specific issue of finance, which is very important for us to think about as we're going through the challenges and the barriers. And that's something that's being promoted quite a bit at the moment. There is a great reliance on debt instruments proposed as a means of financing, not just transport transition, but also other sectors. You're looking at loans. This includes loans, commercial loans, guarantees, insurance, and there's a place for them. But we have to remember that actually a reliance on these debt instruments and the private market instruments generates debt and financial risk in quite a number of ways. I mean, the first one is, of course, it increases the state contingent liabilities, and in an era of very high debt service, this is quite unsustainable. There's also a potential for higher exit costs for state parties where if you have a private investor and that's locked into contractual agreements and also protected through bilateral investment treaties and investment agreements. So it might generate that potential higher cost for if states wanted to exit from certain investments. And number three, it also heightens exposure to volatility in international financial markets. So when you tap into international capital markets, states, particularly developing countries, which are very, very vulnerable to shifts in the international financial system, we need to think about what that means and how predictable and sustainable financing is from international capital markets. And relatedly, because of this increase in private financing, reliance on international capital markets, we need to think about this diversification of the creditor base from public financiers, multilateral, bilateral creditors, to the international capital markets, has to be considered in the context of the gaps in the current existing sovereign debt architecture, which has basically led to a lot of protracted, messy restructuring if states face financial crisis and sovereign debt crisis. It's very difficult to extricate, and so these gaps have to be considered as if we are going to shift from public-based finance to private finance. And also the legal and regulatory reforms linked to a lot of financial instruments may result in the loss of policy and regulatory autonomy. And we saw from yesterday that an integrated approach to transition is really key. But some of the reforms that are associated with some of the financing conditions might be problematic in undermining this policy space. So we need to think about that.
Celine, sorry, you have 1 minute.
Okay, sorry. And then private investors are also sort of interested in commercial returns, right? So this might leave a gap in financing. And I'm just going to close with a plea for a holistic approach to financing. Financing just energy transitions must be part of this broader package of reforms to the current system of global economic governance and international economic law, including dealing with the significant debt burdens of developing countries. You don't add to the burdens already there, trying to transition, because this is going to create greater problems. While there's an imperative, I understand it, to diversify the sources of financing, these terms of the financing, the modalities of financing, must align with countries' sustainable development pathways and, of course, their NDCs, which is important for driving forward mitigation ambition. The policy and regulatory fragmentation we have to overcome, because it's likely to impede coordinated action on climate action, and then so there needs to be coherence between the financing discussions within the UNCCC and also elsewhere, such as through the multilateral development banks. And the interventions to create enabling environments for private investments, as I mentioned earlier, may undermine rather than progress climate action, and so we need to think through these reforms. And of course, what's really important is that you have enough financing to cover every aspect of the just transition, and not about individual projects and programs. You need to look at enhancing adaptive capacities. Public finance must be there, because the private sector finance is not there for these kinds of social mitigation, environmental mitigation issues that we are talking about. And so thank you very much for listening. I'm here as a resource person if you want to come up and talk to me. More on publications can be found on that web link. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Celine. I would now like to go back to Mr. Benyam Reha, Global Practice Manager at the World Bank, for his presentation. The floor is yours, Benyam. Hello? I hear something on the line. Yeah, perfect. Thank you very much. Benyam, are you on the line? Yeah, thank you.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, perfect. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Thank you so much for making the time to talk to us while you're traveling, by the way. We really appreciate this. Thank you.
No problem. 1 second, I need to turn off the other speaker. Okay, so I think you can hear me now, right?
Yes, please. We'll
Hello?
hear you
Can you
fine.
confirm?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Okay, apologies for the technical difficulty. First of all, thank you for the invitation to be part of this important conversation as we get ready for COP28. So I was asked to make a presentation on financing issues related to the barriers, challenges, and financial issues to energy transition in the transport sector. So I will go ahead make a quick, I think somebody is helping me. So can you go next slide, please? Before we talk about the financing issue, let me just give a little bit here on how we approach when we talk about transport decarbonization. We have a holistic view, like many institutions these days. So we use this well-known approach: avoid, shift, improve, which actually targets the different aspects of the levers that we have for transport decarbonization. Unlike the energy sector, where they are primarily using technological change, it's more of like a binary shift for them. You go from dirty coal to clean energy. In transportation, we have many pathways to reach net zero. And in fact, all of this have to work together if we're going to be successful. So let's go to the next one. Now, I'm going to focus on financing electric mobility because although, like I said, we have many pathways for transport decarbonization, the most difficult one to finance is the electrification of transport. But before we again talk about financing, we also have to want to know whether this actually makes economic sense for many developing countries. There is quite a lot of controversies about electric vehicles, whether their high cost makes sense. What happens if the source of energy is coal? How do you set up a different financing mechanism also to get to make electric vehicles affordable? And what market segments also make sense for many low and middle income countries or emerging economies? So we did this flagship study last year, which was launched during COP27. And let me just maybe highlight the main findings of the study because it sets the stage and answers a lot of the questions that most people have when it comes to electric vehicles. Next slide, please. So the main takeaway is that the economic case for the electrification of transportation is already viable in half of the countries we studied. We had 20 countries as a case study, and at least half of them were economically viable. Even though the capital cost is high, the capital cost is still, for many countries, is 80% higher. We expect it to come down to 30, 40%. But because of the amortization that happens and the savings in operating cost and maintenance cost, this costs in life cycle terms, the economics gets better. If you also add environmental benefits, reduction in greenhouse gas emission, cleaning the air, that also bumps up quite a bit. If you will look at it into different market segments for two-wheelers and electric buses, actually you get 90% and 80% of the cases studied were economically viable. So you can see for many countries in Asia, Latin America, Africa, they rely a lot on two-wheelers and three-wheelers and electric buses. So electrifying those makes eminent sense already right away. And now, one interesting thing is the e-mobility benefits are not just only about greenhouse gas emission reductions, but actually it's also about improving local air pollution. in many cities that we looked at, especially the big mega cities like Cairo, Jakarta, those kind of cities, you will see the cleaning of the air is actually the most important benefit that comes from them. Um, and then about the energy, so we also found that actually even on when it becomes cold or dirty source of energy, for the most part, many of this the electrification became viable because the main reason is really the electric vehicles are much more energy efficient than the traditional combustion engines. So those are, I think, the key takeaways. But it does require an innovative financing structure because there is no finance out there for two reasons. I'll come to it, but the main reason is the capital cost is still high. So especially the transit agencies or even the individual owner operators would require a different financing method. So let's move to the next slide, please. So why don't we see finance for electrification going in developing countries? Well, we can divide them into demand and supply side. On the demand side, the vehicle sales market in most developing economies really not well organized, and it's quite fragmented. Most of the industry is dominated by owner operators with very little credit history. So you have right off the bat an industry that's poorly organized and doesn't have any credit to speak of. So and then again, they're fragmented and small, so they are also not attractive for many investors or donors or institutional investors. Lending for investment for small investment has high transaction costs for many of the financial institutions and also for donors, even for that matter. Then the governments also have limited space to support public transport investment and or incentivize fleet renewal. So they really do not have the fiscal space to do it. So finance has to come from somewhere else.
Binyam, sorry, you're going to have to wrap up. Binyam, can you hear me?
Yes.
Binyam, sorry, you're going to have to wrap up so we keep up with the time limit, if you don't mind. If you can just wrap up quickly. Thank you.
Okay, so give me a couple of minutes. Domestic financial institutions do not provide the credit, and so quite a bit of issues. Okay, next slide, please. Can you go next slide? You can just go next slide. So, I mean, the way we are approaching this is then we have to approach this as an ecosystem, and we have to deal with the different barriers, both at the policy level and at the financial level. So we have to address a lot of the barriers in policy and the finance. So one of the things really at the heart of this solving is we need a way to aggregate the demand from different transit agencies or different countries. So we are proposing now to have, for example, for some countries in Africa, to have a regional investment facility, or for the Middle East, North Africa. Also, we can imagine having an investment facility working with some of the financial institutions in the region. Next slide, please. Can you just go a little bit further down? You can go quite a bit. Yeah, so basically, I think the concept here is I don't have time to explain to you because this is the regional investment facility that I think can unlock the financing for electrification, because one, you need a platform like this to aggregate the demand that's coming from different borrowers. And then secondly, it also allows you to pull different source of financing, whether it's climate fund, whether it's MDB type of funding, government's own resources. So having a pooled resources then can allow you to create that fund and blend it and then provide it to the individual owner or borrowers, whether in the form of direct loan or on lending through local financial institutions, etc. So this way, yeah, having a really an ecosystem, wholesale approach, programmatic approach is really the only way we think that is going to unlock the financing, because doing it project by project, transit agency by transit agency is not going to get us many of the successful places like in China, US, now India is trying, is at a bigger scale. So the scale is really what is going to bring us. So smaller countries would have to come together, or cities have to come together to make this happen. Just one quick, there is a complex slide, but it's just to show it answers some of, I think, the questions Celine was raising about getting financing. If you go to the next slide, 1 second. I'll just spend 30 seconds on that. Can you bring the other slide, the next slide? So basically, we need different sorts of financing. This looks complex, but it's quite easy, actually. You have different sorts of capital, private capital, different funds. So you want to use your the available funds in the way they can have the maximum impact. So if you have climate fund, you want to use it to guarantee for example, private investment, or to provide a viability gap funds. And then the private sector, you want to use it to areas where for equity, maybe to set up a maintenance facility or an assembly plant. Those are the kind of, I think, financial innovations that are going to be needed in terms of really bringing it, putting it, and directing it into the appropriate use and where you get the maximum impact. So thank you very much. And this is for the presentation. Maybe if you have later on during the Q&A, I can explain a bit more. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Binyam. I think at least it's a visualization of the word blending, which I think is useful. The next topic is technology and capacity challenges. And now I'd like to invite Mr. Marir Mohamed Hunsi, climate change expert and a member of the Technology Executive Committee, to provide a presentation.
Thank you, coaches, and also thanks the host country for hosting us. I'm a member of the Technology Executive Committee, which is one of the UNFCCC constituted body which focus on technology issues related to climate change adaptation and mitigation measures, which was formed in 2010 with the aim of providing policy guidance to the processes which related to technology. The IPCC defines technology as an equipment and technique, knowledge, and skills. Hence, at the Technology Executive Committee, how we define technology is related to whether it's the hardware, technology, software, and orgware. So three components also makes a part of the technology process. It is the understanding that we have within the Technology Executive Committee. In terms of the reducing greenhouse gas emission, transport is also one of the leading sectors that emit greenhouse gas emission. The IPCC report that was released this year, I also identified some of the key barriers for technology in this sector. These includes the effects of price and income on the availability of the technology that we use for transportation, the shared vehicles, consumer preferences over the improved alternatives vehicles other than which is relatedly available for various conditions and existing environment as well. And also there are alternative fuels as well. Just to highlight, the Technology Executive Committee works in preparing various technology briefs. This is one of the technology briefs that we have formulated this year, which focuses on the enabling environment and challenges to technology development transfer from the lessons learned from the NDCs, the technology needs assessments, and from the technical assistance provided by our sister body, which is the Climate Technology and Network Center. One of the report packs that we heard from this report is the challenges that was outlined is finance remains critical, and the first challenges for developing countries are to access to technologies related to transport sector or else in other sectors as well. The other thing is that remains critical and pivotal is the lack of awareness or information available for the countries in order to implement these technologies on board in their countries. One of the other important elements that we identified was lack of human skills in implementing, in doing the really actual technology development and transfer that is required as well. The publication that we published in last year identified also barriers, opportunities and policy options for these vehicles, I would say, like plug-in electric vehicles, fuel cell electric vehicles, advanced biofuels, shared mobility and fully automated vehicles, which I would briefly touch in the next slides. So in terms of the capacities and technology barriers that we have in these sectors, the plug-in electrical vehicles, we found that consumer awareness and preferences is required, is one of the challenges that we occur. And there is limited availability of charging options and grid impacts, and also battery remains an important technology barrier for having these public electric plug-in electric vehicles in countries. Fuel cells electricals has very similar things, such as awareness remains dominated, as well as the competitions from the BEVs as well. The advanced, with regards to the advanced biofuels, there's limited refueling that is needed. And also the lack of compatibility within the existing vehicle stocks that is available in the market, as well as its direct relations to the food prices and its security, just to name. In terms of the shared mobility, consumer preferences also remains as one of the barriers that we came across, as well as the uncertainty about the greenhouse gas impacts, on the and also the environment as well. Fully automated vehicles have very also similar kind of technology and capacity barriers, which is like confusion or preference of the consumer, which remains cross-cut across all these things, and lack of sharing, as well as developing country challenges such as cost and associated infrastructure. From the report also, we found that there is a prices impact and income. Prices and income has an impact on the chosen vehicles or the mode. People with high income choose private cars, and people with lower income, and they tend to choose the public vehicles as well. So there is an correlation with regards to income and population density in choosing the in the vehicle, as well as the required urban planning as well. In terms of sharing vehicles, there are many sharing vehicles and pooling vehicles that is available within the market and also in the developing countries, such as Uber and other things. But the challenge is there is a lack of financial viability for the demand responsive transport system, as well as lack of proper governance and institutional mechanism available for guiding these things.
Mario, please wrap up. You're going to have.
This is going to be the last. Thank you very much. In terms of consumer preference, infrastructure availability remains as a critical barrier. Policies as well as storage and capacities with regards to the alternative fuels. And that's it. Thank you very much, colleagues.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Maria. Now I invite Mr. Roland Roche, Director of Innovation and Technology Center at ARENA. Please provide your presentation. Thank you very much.
Dear co-chairs, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, thank you to invite ARENA here for the second global dialogue. As you can see here on this slide, there is room for improvement in the transport sector targets, not within the global climate ambition. But the decarbonization of the transport sector holds a great potential to reach climate goals. The transport sector is roughly responsible for 1/4 of the global CO2 emission and is currently amongst the fastest growing sectors. Electrovehicles tend to be more expensive upfront compared to combustion vehicles. Reducing the cost of batteries through innovation and policies is offering incentives, and subsidies can help make electrovehicles more affordable. The grid capacity is a key factor to mention here. Widespread electrovehicle adoption can put additional strain on the electrical grid, requiring upgrades to accommodate increased energy demand. Smart grid technology can help to manage with this challenge. I would like to mention here some blind spots which are obviously not known, and where it is very important to create awareness also by policymakers. And I would like to mention here a few points here from our ARENA Innovation Landscape report. Smart charging does not necessarily mean bidirectional charging. One-directional charging will do it to start and build up the infrastructure for electromobility. Development of charging infrastructure should not mimic the petrol filling stations, nor focus only on fast charging. Ensure that charging infrastructure is standardized and interoperable. Planning for electrovehicle charging infrastructure deployment should be inclusive and reflect the local setting. Mobility trends need to be considered in electrification strategies, and co-locating electrovehicles charging points with solar generation is very important to minimize the impact on grids. Also, state agencies should coordinate and maintain consistencies. Regarding the role of hydrogen and e-fuels, green hydrogen has also an important role to play in decarbonizing road transport, but it is more important to use green hydrogen in sectors where there is no other options to decarbonize them. So in the aviation and in the maritime sector to achieve decarbonization, but also on rails you may see opportunities to use green hydrogen. Also, let's say there is two activities, let's say the transport sector, but also the industry sector that need help to ramp up the green hydrogen production. So the green hydrogen can be used to replace fossil fuel produced with fossil fuel produced hydrogen. It can help to replace fossil fuel-based feedstock. And it is important to use the use of green hydrogen in chemicals and steel making, where there are no other options as to decarbonize those sectors. And let's say the decarbonization of the steel making will come and will create new markets, for instance, for iron pellets. What are the green hydrogen challenges? Still high production cost of green hydrogen. The capex of water electrolyzers must be reduced through innovative processes. Hydrogen storage and transport is still very costly. These costs have to come down. Ocean-going ships have already engines that can be fueled with hydrogen and its derivatives, but the bunkering infrastructure at ports for green hydrogen and ammonia and methanol and the other green hydrogen derivatives is still lagging behind. The challenge in sustainable sourcing exists. So if you produce carbon molecules for e-methanol, you need also sustainable CO2 to produce this methanol. Also to mention, ammonia has high production cost and is highly toxic, requiring special storage and safety measures which comes with specific infrastructure needs. Yesterday, my colleague, Gürbüz Gönül, spoke also about the challenges in the biofuel sector. So the challenges here are scalability, certification, and traceability while ensuring sustainability. Problematic is limited biomass feedstock. Biojet has challenges in accessibility of sustainable feedstocks. High demand from multiple sectors makes scaling up of biofuels very difficult. Also, potential sustainability risks, growth of feedstock used in biofuel production may affect land use, which could impact global food security. On the storyline here for the...
Roland, you have 1 minute left, please.
Yes. Storyline. Critical materials are necessary for the electrification of transport. We need to ramp up mining capacities while not compromising on ESG. Innovation offers a solution to substitute and recycle materials. With the renewable-based economies, technologies can rely on alternative minerals, and innovation is key to that. And we are increasingly seeing solutions that reduce or completely eliminate the need for some minerals. Steel circularity plays a vital role in supporting electromobility and addressing critical material supply chain challenges in the global energy transition. It helps to conserve resources, reduce energy consumption, enhance supply chain resilience, lower environmental impact, reduce costs, and drive technological innovation, all of which are crucial for achieving more sustainable and resilient energy future, also for the transport sector. Cost reduction is the key point here. Steel circularity can lead to cost savings in the production of electro-vehicles and related infrastructure. As the demand for electric vehicles and renewable energy infrastructure grows, cost-effective material management becomes increasingly important to achieve a successful energy transition. Sorry, that's the wrong direction. I just would like to summarize here the challenges. So infrastructure for widespread electrification and availability of electric vehicles at lower upfront cost, availability and scale-up of cost-competitive green hydrogen and its derivatives, challenges in biofuel scalability, certification and traceability while ensuring sustainability, development of mining capacity for critical materials without compromising on ESG criteria. Innovation offers solutions to substitute and recycle materials. And also steel circularity plays a vital role in supporting electromobility and addressing critical material supply challenges in the transport sector. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. The next topic is barriers and challenges around addressing sustainable and development socioeconomic impacts. And I would now like to invite Mr. Jean-Marc Monica, who's a program officer at the Amalgamated Transport and General Workers Union, as well as the co-chair of the Sustainable Transport Working Group at the International Transport Workers Federation, ITF, to provide a presentation. He'll be the only speaker on this topic. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lola, and greetings to all of us. I'm going to speak to challenges and barriers around sustainable development and socio-economic impacts. I will first start by saying that if we are to get our mitigation ambition to scale, I think it is imperative that we get a bit of sense of what kind of barriers and some understanding of the challenges therein. And, sorry, did I go fast? I want to give some top-line barriers, and I've picked 4. I know this list can go as long as you would wish, depending on your context and your situation. But these 4 barriers could be top line and could be universal. Since yesterday, we've been listening, almost every other country is talking about these 4. And for policy and regulation, the key overriding issue here is political will. And I think my friends from the UK and Britain can speak to this. Politics and political will gives our governments politics for understandable reasons to go for short-term thinking instead of long-term ambitious policy and regulations that can spur what we would want. And every other 4 years, 5 years, politicians will go for elections and they'll seek to deliver for the voters in order to be voted back. So this is a major one. And the faster we start understanding how to navigate the politics and the political will around regulation and policy, the better we move our mitigation agenda. The other one is around technology limitations, and I think we've spoken to this. For EVs, the issue of range and infrastructure, and then the fuels, still we are lacking in scalability. But underlying all this, these new technologies can spur development and give our countries competitive edge and innovation. The other one is public awareness and acceptance. And normally, you see, when we look at public awareness, we normally concentrate on developing strategies for general public awareness. One key thing I want to say here, most of our strategies don't target us, the policymakers, because sometimes our jobs are not very friendly for public awareness campaign to attend to these campaigns because you are always in office and this. When do you attend some of these? Yesterday, Philip and Amanda talked about non-motorized transportation, walking and cycling. Where I come from in Uganda, we walked during our youth days. We rode. Actually, we just started driving the other day. But when we get to do policy around infrastructure in urban places, what do we plan for? Vehicles. And I think our sister from Saudi Arabia yesterday spoke to why maybe we plan for vehicles. Maybe it is a necessity because our public transport is in a mess. Two, it is also for status. So a family of maybe 4 could have 5 vehicles. So public awareness, we also need to target ourselves as public policy makers. For challenges, I've also picked about 4 key top-line challenges: social equity, jobs, and transition skills. This is the big one in the house. And social equity, the issues around access and serving all vulnerable groups. And for the jobs is where I wanted to take a minute and speak about a new innovative strategy we're using to address some of these job issues, especially in this global south. We're doing what we call labor impact assessments to support the move towards mass transportation, and we're doing this in collaboration with a lot of other partners. We have Transport for Cairo, we have Transtech in Switzerland, we have ODA in South Africa, we have International Transport Workers Federation in the UK, and Manchester, we have Global Labour Institute. So there's a lot of issues around that we've learned around this. We've done this labor impact assessment in Kampala, in Nairobi, in Accra, in Côte d'Ivoire, Abidjan, and in Dakar in Senegal. And the workers in the informal transport setup have a lot of challenges and issues herein addressed. But we also look at this as opportunities, and this is where the key is, that sometimes not all is gloom. We think that this is a very critical moment where we can tap into opportunities for formalizing this sector through addressing some of those immediate issues, through looking at alternative issues like moving to cashless. I know my friends from Kenya are doing a lot of stuff around legislation on going cashless. We have moving towards scheduled services in Accra and in Ghana. We have moving away from individual to collective ownership, the SACCO system, and then the EVs. Actually, Dakar, if our colleagues from Senegal will be here, they'll speak to this. It is a vision that Sedut is going to give us the first 100% electric vehicle buses in Dakar. So all this can happen if we have critical social dialogue as a component of engagement with the workers, and I think we can strive for that. However, as a conclusion, I want to say that this requires collective action from government, industries, communities, and individuals. And one of the things sometimes we fail to do is to look at the payoffs, that there's a lot of benefits that we can speak to. Improved health, reduced traffic congestion. And by the way, during COVID, almost every city, every country reported what? Clean air. Now, most of us participated in advising our governments to take us out of the COVID situation. Is there anything we've learned out of this? And I think the synthesis report 6 gives us some of the clues. We can use that to tap into trying to see how we can move our mitigation work program agenda forward in a very fast place that we want to. And that's what we're saying in our International Transport Workers Federation. We say we are moving the world, so we need also to move our mitigation work program faster. Thank you very much. Shukran.
Many thanks, John. The next subtopic and final for this session is policies and measures. I would now like to invite Mrs. Marusha Kardama, Secretary General of SLOCAT, to provide her presentation. Marusha, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much, Lola. Thanks very much, co-chairs. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. At this point, it's very difficult to add anything that hasn't been said so far. So what I'm going to try to do, because originally, as you remember, we were going to talk policy first, is perhaps ask for your indulgence so you could listen to me a bit as a kind of attempt to wrap up a bit and recap a bit the different aspects that we've been listening to. And that's a bit how I would like to frame all this. So let's start by some of the main challenges we see there. And of course, this very first important challenge we've got is that most of the world's population is lacking access to affordable, safe, sustainable transport, while transport demand keeps rising. Just to put it again into perspective, I think it's important to remember that only 32% of African urban population and 38% in Asia have got convenient access to public transport, compared to a global average of 56%. And when we look at the modal share of rail over the past decade, we see that we are still having only 6 to 7% of passenger trips being done in rail, which means that actually it's still very limited and there's a lot of potential. If we look at informal transport, that perhaps is a word we haven't mentioned in particular here over the past few hours, it's important for us to remember that it's moving millions, that is employing thousands around the world, and that it's actually supporting urban economies. For instance, in several African cities, 90% of all motorized trips are going to be in informal services, and in some Latin American cities, the size of so-called informal fleets is going to be equal or even higher to the so-called formal fleets. But nevertheless, we seem to tend to forget a bit about this, and that actually ends up in limitations around the data, the policy, and the knowledge that we collect around informal transport. Of course, we also mentioned a series of other challenges that are there, and I would like to have this particular word for safety. We know that the vast majority of roads worldwide are not safe for cyclists and walkers, and this has got an impact on the potential of modal shift. The risk is that as certain geographies has got more and more access to motorized options, they will stop walking and cycling because they wouldn't feel that it'll be safe enough. Of course, when we're looking at road crashes, the bad news, we all know it, is that despite the very ambitious targets over the past decade, the prevailing figures are horrific. It's still the leading cause of death under 30-year-olds around the globe. And of course, if we were to invest a bit more on public transport, we could be potentially reducing the crashes by attracting users from private vehicles into public transport. We've also mentioned the impact on health through air pollution and air quality, isn't it? And fundamentally, there is this notion as well of affordability. That's still another challenge that we need to grapple with around a policy. And actually, the increasing share of household expenditure that is going into financing travel in families is pretty significant. For instance, in the LAC region, we have seen that it represents 17% of household expenses. So what are some solutions? Something that I heard from all of you yesterday, and I think is very remarkable, is that access to transport is access to jobs, to services, to socio-economic opportunities, and therefore enabling access is going to mean different things in different places. But there is one thing that can actually work in helping to enable that access. And that one thing is integrated transport and land planning. Of course, you heard already yesterday some of my fellow speakers talking about, therefore, the implied change in perspectives, that we have to rethink how we use public space, putting people first and not vehicles. We equally talked already about transit-oriented development, how it's actually helping many cities around the world to create compact, walkable, and mixed-use cities where we depend less on our cars. Let's remember that the IPCC is telling us that a combination of public-oriented development with mixed land use can actually help us reduce by a quarter GHG emissions by mid-century. That is actually dramatic. It could be a phenomenal way of looking into things. I also heard some of you during the World Cafe reminding us about the reinvigorated momentum for proximity planning, like the 15-minute city in Paris, or the superblocks in Barcelona, or the low-traffic neighborhoods in London. But fundamentally, the good thing about integrated transport and land management is that it's a story about horizontal coordination across different departments, and therefore a story potentially of policy coherence. It is equally a story about vertical integration across different levels of government. We are seeing across the globe many cities which are increasingly deploying sustainable urban mobility plans, SUMPs, that you might know them by the acronym, and equally access regulations with low, ultra-low, or zero emission zones. There is, of course, margin for improvement here. You see on the slide that worldwide we are talking about around 3% of cities having in place or planning a low emission zone, and 10% having a SUMP, a Sustainable Urban Mobility Plan, and some initial steps towards zero emission zones in Europe, in China, and in India. So moving on now to some considerations on energy efficiency, vehicles and fuels. Three main messages that I would love to leave here for us to consider as we move into the workshops. First is that we are making real good progress on energy efficiency, but these savings are getting outweighed by rising transport emissions. E-vehicles is a huge uptake, we know it, but attention, because they are still only 1% of the global fleets. And then, great, we have electric vehicles, but only a quarter of those are actually being fueled by renewables. So let's try to break down this a bit. Let's start with the energy efficiency. So the growth in transport demand and the shift towards more emitting modes is actually resulting in increasing emissions and increasing energy demand. We had a lot of talk already about the bigger size of vehicles, isn't it? But thinking it in energy terms, it's 20% more consumption in a sub than in an average medium-sized car. There is also a word here, I think, about the older and more polluting vehicles that are on our roads and the room for improvement we have here, because only 2/3 of countries importing second-hand vehicles do actually have got regulations about those inputs. And we also have got margin of opportunity for improvement on the fuel economy and the vehicle efficiency standards for heavy-duty vehicles. Only 7 jurisdictions, whether national or subnational across the globe, have got those type of standards in place. Of course, we do know that the high dependency of transport on fossil fuels, it's something that we really need to look into. It's still at a 95%, and this share has really not moved much over the past decade. And that, of course, takes us towards electrification. Perhaps a challenge we are facing is that electrification is often dominated as a debate by e-cars, when actually there is quite a significant opportunity to widen that debate. Yesterday we had great presentations by colleagues reminding us the impressive growth in sales of e-cars over the past years. I mean, 1 in 7 cars sold in 22 was actually electric. But attention, because as we know, it's two-wheelers that are actually dwarfing any other electric vehicle in figures. Look at that, it's 275 million stock only in 2022. And the good news as well is that right now we can say that 4% of the global stock of buses is electric, while at the same time we are seeing the first steps in electrifying informal mobility in Asia. When it comes to medium and heavy-duty vehicles, there has been an increased amount of sales, 50% in only 1 year, but again, they are only representing 1.2% of the total sales. All that while, in the meanwhile, rail is the most electrified mode we have, and as you can see, the share we are using it is not that significant. And well, as I was telling you, the bad news is that there is an uptake on electric vehicles, but actually the electric vehicle policies are not necessarily linked to renewable power generation. There is good news, though. We see a lot of biofuel blending mandates adopted by 70 countries around the world. So where does this lead us in terms of solutions? Well, to something that you have already seen, isn't it? How can we actually reduce all the problems and increase that demand? With thanks to Ambita for showing that avoid, shift, and improve diagram yesterday, what I wanted to particularly underscore here is the hierarchy that is implicit in these avoid, shift, and improve, which I think is the most important aspect that I would like to leave with you. And also the fact that if we apply the hierarchy, first we avoid, then we shift, and then we improve, we are actually going to be working on the levers of transport demand. So we're going to be doing transit-oriented development, parking policies, pricing, but we're also going to be working on areas that are beyond the transport departments. We're going to be working on digital services, less passenger transport, on circular economy, less freight being moved around the globe. I'd like to leave you just with that IEA 10-point action plan for cutting oil dependency in the transport sector that could actually save up to almost 3 million barrels of oil a day from the transport sector, with measures that cut across avoid, shift and improve, from working from home, from free car Sundays in cities, to access depending on plates in cities. I think it's really a report that is absolutely worth looking into. But fundamentally, as a conclusion here, avoid, shift, improve for what? For integrated, intermodal, and multidimensional approaches, for a mutually reinforcing transformation of both transport and the energy sector, because the opportunity is huge. There are huge opportunities out there for better communities if we actually combine less energy-demanding transport systems, less car-centric passenger transport, less road-centric freight transport, and of course, if we progressively move away from fossil fuels in transport. Thank you very much for listening, and looking forward to discussing more with you this afternoon.
Thank you very much, Marusha. And now I invite our next and final speaker, Mrs. Mahua Acharya, former CEO of Convergence Energy Services Limited, India, for her presentation. She joins us virtually. Mahua, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you. Once again, I'm so sorry I'm not able to be with you in person right now. I'm taking this call from Nairobi, and the Emirates and Etihad flights were just not able to get me in there on time. So thank you again anyway for having me, and look forward to meeting with you all in person sometime soon. I thought I will share, after Marusha came in, I thought I would share with the UN and all other friends in this room some of the experience that we had in India. And I focused this on electric buses because I didn't want to get into the weeds of little things. I fully agree with Marusha that, look, even after all of this effort, we're less than 5%. But I must also say that electric mobility, certainly in India, is very looked at very enthusiastically. It's a highly rapidly emerging market. But that said, it's not without its barriers. And I thought, let me share some of the experiences that we had very recently on electric bus program. So if I could just ask the next slide. Okay, so before we get into this, let me just share with the audience that there are, for one, there are very few electric buses on the roads. Second, India needs a whole lot more buses, even if they were diesel. Let's just start with that. India just needs many, many more buses. And then in that subset, if we have to convert them to electric, there already is only very few of them. And the prevailing perception for the longest time was that it's so expensive, how will we afford it? So that was the starting point. And so I listed out over here some of these quote-unquote barriers. Not all of them have been overcome, but I thought, let me share with you all what all we did as a country to try and fix each barrier one by one. First and foremost, in the bus business, the first thing is that, everybody was owning and operating a bus because that's the traditional model. We moved it from own and operate your bus to providing mobility as a service. And that's a very different, not just way of thinking, it's a very different contract. The taxes are different. The management is different. The whole contract structure is different. The performance, everything's different. It's a service contract. That was the hypothesis, and that's where the bus programs now are building on. First barrier, are there enough even vehicles? There are 5 OEMs out there. Are they locally manufactured? Is there enough variation and choice? We have 2 sets of buses. There's one size and a bigger size. But then what happens to smaller cities? Maybe we need smaller buses. Maybe we need the buses because just something as simple as the turning radius is not there. So on the right-hand side are some of the things that we did to overcome these barriers and challenges. There are 5 OEMs. The challenge is that, well, the good thing is that there are 5 of them, so we could get competition. The downside is that the poor things, I mean, now they have to cope with the supply orders. They're having to deal with it, raising funds to expand against these supply orders. And the new ones are getting smaller orders. So there are some new ones coming along as well. So we had something to start with. Then where the battery industry is just nascent, it's still very nascent. And the batteries are still are still quite heavy. So, you know, when you size your public transport, you have to think about a policy decision. Do I want to be a passenger carrier, a people carrier? Do I want to be a battery carrier? Because the total vehicle weight is limited. But then we decided we're going to work with today's technology. And of course, we're going to plan for the future. We optimize the local conditions and we get on with the technology that the world has today. Then the other thing is the market structure. Right now, for what's going on is mostly OEMs, that's the original equipment manufacturers, they're doing everything. So we don't have enough operators. They don't have the financial capacity to own and operate the bus for the cities. This is work in progress. It's a market that will get defined over time and it'll achieve certain level of sophistication over time. Congestion, I don't need to tell anybody about traffic congestion. But then when you want to achieve a slightly lower price, you have to get to, we needed to get to like 200 a day. But then if your vehicle is going at 10 kilometers an hour, 15 kilometers an hour, we'll never be able to get to 200 kilometers a day before the day closes. So these are some of the limitations that we had. So we said, you know, we're going to try and achieve 200, which means that all the buses had to go back at night to the depot. Maybe things are little different for new cities, because what we were doing is we were putting buses into existing cities. Now, if we were to replan our cities, maybe we'd plan them differently. Charging infrastructure, space limitations. For those of you that have seen Indian cities, you know, space is a big issue. Plus, we didn't think about big depots. Now we need many more buses. We're not just replacing the diesel buses, we're also getting new ones. So where will the space come from? So the only answer is that just have to integrate early into the planning, like really early on, have to put that in. Grid capacity, big challenge. These are big batteries, they need lots of power. Who's going to pay for that? The upstream infrastructure, who will bear? There's the transport business, and then there's the electric utility business. So not something that anyone actually also thought about at that time, just something that takes place in reality. And same as above, we just have to plan. Going forward, they're all being planned now. That's the good news, but we just had to work with what we had. Let me just go to the next one. STU, sorry about the acronym, that is State Transport Undertaking. It's the State Transport Corporation. The first lot of buses were there. That's the experience, the program that I was managing. Like I was saying, the traditional method is to own and operate. But now we're converting this to, you know, quote unquote, gross cost contracting. And that's how we were able to achieve certain prices. But these capacities, the capacity of these state transport corporations has always been to own and operate the bus, really good at doing that. But now we're changing it completely and we're asking them to manage a service contract. So performance criteria are different, their KPIs are different. The two have to align. So got no choice, we're working at it one step at a time. There's a lot of attention to building out the capacity to suit these kind of contracts. Of course, very little knowledge, very little knowledge on electric mobility as a whole sector. The whole thing is also new, batteries and their performance is just developing. Also very little knowledge on doing something like this at scale. So we took 10 months to release the first tender, to close and release the first tender. It took 10 months of intense consultation and a process that we ran with states, with ministries, with different OEMs, because when we started it, we were attempting something that had perhaps not been done before. So that there was a lot of knowledge sharing that took place through that exercise. I mean, I must share, it was one of the most exhaustive periods of my career, but also perhaps one of the most satisfying, because this little group was part of that an original process.
Sorry, Mahua, I'm going to have to ask you to wrap up shortly. Thank you.
Sure, yeah. The good thing is that we achieved a price that was 30% less than diesel. No single ministry is in charge, but we've managed to deal with that because the Prime Minister's office coordinates other ministries. Can I just go to the next slide? Now, that said, India has contracted about 20,000 electric buses to date. The next time some of you are in Delhi, where I live, you'll see them rolling on the streets. Prices are cheaper than diesel. 50,000 target was announced. It's well on its way. You can see 20,000 have been contracted. All of these so far have been in the big cities, but very recently, about 1.5 months ago, there's a huge push to put out buses in the smaller cities as well. The financing needs are massive, so this is work in progress. And we're building out risk mitigation instruments to address this. Everybody's very active. The ecosystem is very, very alive, and the government is still at the wheel, and it needs to still be at the wheel, and it is, because this is probably the most important barrier removal until e-buses becomes mainstream. So that's all I had. Thank you for that.
Thank you so much, Mahua. I'd like to thank again all the facilitators, also all the experts who presented very interesting presentations and insights.
So we are now moving to the World Cafe session, and I'll just go through the instructions. Similar to yesterday, 4 tables are provided for each of the guiding questions, and the 4 guiding questions remain the same, of course. So yesterday, each of you joined 2 different groups. So today, please join the other 2 groups to discuss the 2 remaining questions that you did not join yesterday. Each World Cafe will run, or each round will run for approximately 40 minutes. And just like yesterday, a microphone will be provided at each table, and it's just for recording purposes. So please use the microphone, even if your voice is loud enough to be heard. This is just to keep accurate note-taking. We encourage all participants to engage in a conversation and in a dialogue with one another, similar to what we saw yesterday. I think we have an announcement from the Secretariat at the stage. Bernd, please.
Thank you very much, Amma. Just one announcement, maybe several of you already heard about it. This evening, our host, the UAE, are kindly inviting all of you to a cultural event. More information in detail will follow via email to all of you. So at 6:30, for those of you who chose to join, there will be buses bringing you to different destinations. So you need to pick which destination, which bus you want to be in, and then yeah, have a good evening and enjoy the time.
Thank you, Bernd, and please start. You may now start the World Cafe. Thank you very much. This session is adjourned. Thank you.